You're on the mute front there because I then couldn't get back to my screen either. Oh dear, that's what I get for trying to be organized and have the slides ready to share. Okay, thanks everybody for your patience waiting for me there. I'll whiz through this part because although it's really useful, it probably isn't the most interesting part of the session compared with hearing about the real life examples. But first of all, I wanted to kind of give you a forewarning that most of the funding sources that we found when looking for funders that are willing to fund arts and STEM or science, engineering collaborations are coming from the science end of things. So I don't want to oversell them, but some of them are, the definitions vary a little bit, the eligibility varies, but I think we found a few examples that have got decent amounts of money to make available and where we've had previous University of Glasgow successes. Some of them do focus possibly more on visual approaches rather than working with arts researchers, but I think there should hopefully be something in here for everybody. Most of them are not specifically about arts and science collaborations, but in all the cases we found it's a focus that's certainly eligible. So to start with our two internal funds that we'd like to bring your attention to, the MVLS Engagement with Research Fund and the Glasgow Knowledge Exchange Fund, this kind of collaboration falls within the realms of both of them. The MVLS Engagement with Research Fund is for research-related public engagement, activity and skills development. It must have MVLS involvement, but it can have partners from other colleges. And the GK has small and flexible funds strands available that go up to £30,000, and I've checked through these. In a previous example where of one of their funds was the Scottish Learning Disabilities Observatory and the Institute of Health and Wellbeing, who were working with an external partner called Listen, Drink, Think, Draw about translating academic papers through visualization and filming. Moving on to our external funders, one that's particularly close to my heart and, as Cassie mentioned, really relevant to anybody working across health, biomedical sciences and the arts, is the Scott Penn Wellcome Engagement Award. Wellcome previously had a specific dedicated public engagement fund, but that's currently closed. So the Scott Penn Wellcome Engagement Award is probably your best bet at the moment. It distributes research enrichment funding within Scotland of up to £100,000. And it has to be led by a Wellcome research grant holder. But one of the good things about it is that interinstitutional and interdisciplinary collaborations are encouraged, and early career researchers are welcome to be named partners and to be funded on projects where possible. If you're interested in that one, please do come and speak to me because I'm a contact for the scheme. Another scheme that specifically mentions collaboration with the arts as an approach that they're keen to encourage is the Royal Society. I just realized if I could maybe move this thing. Okay, sorry. The Royal Society, their funding is open to Royal Society research fellows to engage, to undertake public engagement projects based on their research and to increase skills, knowledge and confidence. But as I say, it does specifically talk about collaborations with the arts. Another relatively large learned society where that's part of the remit is the Physiological Society. And we know that we have a current interdisciplinary project led by Craig Daly in the School of Life Sciences. So it is one where University of Glasgow has had success recently. As I say, I'm whizzing through these, but we'll make these slides available to you. The Arts and Humanities Research Council has a follow-on funding scheme for current AHRC grant holders, which is open to collaboration to achieve impact, but it isn't a specific aim of the scheme. It's designed to support innovative and creative engagement with new audiences and user communities. And again, this is arising from research grants held by the applicants. The Royal Society of the Royal Academy of Engineering rather has a really extensive and established set of public engagement awards called Ingenious, and they're really worth a look if you have any potential link with engineering projects, because it's a really good and well thought out scheme with some really substantial awards within it. Its aim is to inspire creative public engagement with engineering projects, and it again doesn't specifically ask for interdisciplinary collaborations, but we know that, for example, the University of Glasgow's Imagineer project, which Zara was a crucial player in, was funded through this scheme. And I've put a link to that in the Padlet for this session so that you can find out more about that. As an example, that was a collaboration between Theatre Studies and the School of Engineering. The last couple are just wanted to mention a scheme by the British Academy called the Leverhulme Small Research Grants. This is a slightly special case. I'm kind of giving a mention here because it was the COVID special funding round of this scheme was the one that funded Azadeh and Daniele's collaboration that you'll hear about in the case studies. And again, this one's slightly different because it is about research rather than engagement specifically, but it's potentially useful because it again is open to early career researchers, which not all of the schemes are. And then the very last one that I wanted to mention was the Nerc, the Natural Environment Research Council's Knowledge Exchange Fellowships. A bit different again, because this is specifically a fellowship about knowledge exchange rather than engagement projects per se. They do mention that public engagement and the development of new relationships leading to collaborative projects are both encouraged approaches within the scheme. And this one is particularly interesting because it pays for salary costs as well as direct costs, and again is open to early career researchers. So that's the end of my funding spotlight. As I say, we will make these slides available for anyone who's interested in the schemes, and then I'll hand back to Cassie.
Lovely, thanks very much, Becky. We might come back to more questions about these later, but there was a question from Manon Ac Anavach in the chat there, asking, is there any information on success rates for these kinds of bids?
That's a really good question. It can be really hard to get hold of that information, and I assume that it varies greatly across the schemes, but I know for example, one of the reasons that the Wellcome Public Engagement Fund was discontinued was because actually the success rates were incredibly low. They were about 3 and 4%, and the funders felt that that wasn't, you know, a fair use of people's time. And part of the remit of the Scott Penn Wellcome Engagement Award was that the positioning of public engagement support within the institutions and more locally within Scotland would help to increase the rate. So I know for that scheme, the success rate is much higher. It's around the 50% level, but I don't have specific information on the other ones. I think it's pretty variable.
Okay, great, thanks, Becky. Yeah. Oh, and another one just come in. We'll squeeze one more in. Can you collaborate with industry for these funding schemes?
Again, I think this is very variable per scheme. I tried to keep the information fairly succinct just for the purposes of today's presentation, but within the funding guidelines for each of those, they do specify. So I know that, for example, I'm pretty sure the Nerc one and the AHRC one specifically flagged industry collaborations, but there were 3 or 4 in there, I think, where that was flagged, but it does vary between schemes. Yeah.
Super. So basically, we'll make sure that you have access to Becky afterwards as well, so that you can dive into any more specific questions that you might have on this. I'm just promising that on your behalf, Becky. I hope that's okay.
And Rosemary Barbeau has just popped up in the chat there as well to say that external partners are very much encouraged in the Glasgow KE Fund, so she might be willing to join me for a bit of Q&A on that at the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's really useful. So we've got a bit of groundwork with the nitty-gritty of funding. What we want to do now is just to introduce you very quickly to a few of our colleagues who work in this area and who can give you a little snippet of a case study that will give a flavour of the kind of work going on. So I think we'll go in the order that they were listed on the slide. So it's Sarah, if you're happy to go first. Should we hand over to you for the next 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. Thanks very much for having me. So I'm actually, oh, you've disabled screen sharing and I need to share my screen.
Don't worry, Zara will be on it.
So I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history to sort of situate art and science collaborations, and then give you. Don't know why. Did you hear me just then?
Yeah, we lost you for a wee bit there.
You're now co-host, Sarah, so you should be able to share.
Brilliant. Okay. Let's make sure that's the right one. Is that the right one? So, I live in Dundee, and I'm indoctrinated in the value of art science collaborations because here in Dundee we have the RRS Discovery. And I don't know how many of you have been watching the Ridley Scott trip to the Arctic, but the Discovery went to the Antarctic in 1901. But what some people don't really remember about it, other than Scott dying in his tent, is that the guy he died next to was Edward Wilson. And Edward Wilson was an artist and has a collection of 150 paintings made in the Antarctic in the museum dedicated to him, and also watercolors of British birds, and was very much on the expedition, not just because he was a surgeon and not just because he was a zoologist, but also because he was an artist. Now, at the same time that they were off in the Antarctic on their ill-fated expedition, in Dundee was Professor Darcy Thompson. And Darcy Thompson was very interested in the development of life sciences and biology, and particularly the intersection of biology and mathematics. And he, in 2017, after the expedition, called On Growth and Form, which is widely recognized now as perhaps the beginnings of what we now think of as mathematical biology. Now, I guess I'm telling you that story because there was this sense that artists are useful to scientists for illustrating theoretical ideas or illustrating research, and that is not a new idea. But in 100 years, some things have changed. And so in Dundee, I founded LifeSpace, which is a science and art research gallery within the School of Life Sciences. And I did this in part through collaborations with scientists there to get away from the idea that artists are merely illustrators of scientific work, but are actually joint researchers in scientific endeavor. And they might use different methods, but the scientists and artists are sort of equally useful to one another. So over the course of the 4 years that I was working at the University of Dundee, I probably curated 4 shows a year in this exhibition space. And some of them were direct results of collaborations that I fostered between artists and scientists. For instance, here you can see artists Thompson and Craighead, who are very renowned British media artists working with internet and digital practices, talking to Paul Nurse and Mike Ferguson, trying to convince Paul Nurse of the value of art-science collaboration. This was before the Crick was built. But sometimes in LifeSpace, I just was able to invite in artists whose collaborations had happened elsewhere and bring them into the university in order to expose scientists in that building to other ways of working and other ways of thinking. So the little mini case study that I'm going to give you 2 minutes of is the work of Daksha Patel. And we invited Daksha, so this is exactly 100 years after the publication of On Growth and Form, while we were thinking about how we would build up to the centenary event that would recognize that publication, and while we were really being very conscious about how we could revisit ideas of artists collaborating on their expeditions. So we brought Daksha's work in. Daksha tends to work in drawing, and so you would think that is pretty much illustration. But actually it's so much more than that, because she really engages in exactly the tools and the methods that the scientists are using. And her Noisy Body series is drawn from MRI and CT scanning, and you can see they're exquisitely beautiful. And what we did with every exhibition at LifeSpace was we invited the artists to show their work, but also to then talk to scientists, and then to go into the university's collections and draw on some of the many things that Darcy Thompson collected. Some of them he collected from trading with people who were going down to Antarctic, some of his specimens. But also we have at Dundee an artist's book collection, And we would ask the artists to select those works and put those on display alongside their own work. And this just meant that for the scientists in the building, if they felt a bit uncomfortable or unfamiliar with the art, there might be something in the display case or in the cabinet that they did recognize and they could relate to. And then an artist and a scientist could stand together next to the work or next to the object and have a conversation. So it was through inviting Daksha to come to Dundee and to show these works, which hadn't been seen in Scotland before, which were based on residencies that she had done in medical imaging institutes elsewhere, that a scientist named Miratel Mukit met Daksha, saw these works and realized that she had made this animation, which I'd invite you to go have a look at and watch online, called All of a Sudden Something Popped, where she talked to people who had suffered brain injuries and strokes. And she animated from these scans of their brains this film that has this amazing voiceover of patients describing the moment when something in their brain went wrong. And so Miratel and Daksha, by my introducing them and saying, maybe you guys want to talk about this, got on like a house on fire. And Miratel researches Parkinson's, and specifically genes involved in the development of Parkinson's. And he was at a real interesting moment in his career also, where he felt he had capacity as a clinical scientist within his lab to bring an artist like Daksha in. And so over the course of the following year, Daksha worked with both the scientists in Miratel's lab and also the patient groups that he was working with in the NHS around Parkinson's. And together they came up with a public engagement project that allowed Daksha to draw, that it allowed Daksha to work with patient groups to also draw, and then to use those drawings as a way of interpreting some of the science that was happening. So I've put a link there, and it resulted in this only one-day event, but an amazing event where these drawings that had been made, that had been she'd been experimenting in the Dundee print studio within Dundee Contemporary Arts, using etching and using laser cutting to etch these images. And then she invited scientists from the lab to come in and sit with audience members and with Parkinson's patients to discuss what they saw in those images and to reflect on them. And this project went on to win a Brian Cox Engagement Award. And I had very little to do with this part. I just did that first crucial thing, which was bring the artist in and show their work and allow the conversation with the scientist to evolve on its own and see where it went. And I think that's the part that is sometimes missed here, is the way in which you have to work out who's going to get along like a house on fire and be willing to go to the ends of the earth and maybe risk freezing in a tent. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know who's up next. Cassie.
Hello, sorry. It was awful timing. Someone's come to fix my washing machine. I had to dash to the door. I'm so sorry. So we'll go next to Azadeh and Daniele, who is, this is a project that's really close to my heart. So I'm going to leave you for the next 5 minutes with Azadeh and Daniele, who can fill you in.
Thank you very much, Cassie. Daniela, I guess I'll go first and then I pass it on to you.
Yeah, just checking. I can share screen because I've got a few slides I wanted to share. Yeah, you go first.
I have some slides because I don't have any slides.
Yeah, I was just preparing them now, so I was cheating anyway.
Well, thank you so much for having us here. I'm going to briefly talk to you about, or basically introduce just our research project, which late last year, received UK RIHRC grants. So the name of the project is Touch Post-COVID, Navigating Deafblindness via Haptic Audio Visual Technologies of Perception. Basically, I assume the title will give the core of the project away, which we are looking at impact of COVID on the sense of touch and the issues around touch deprivation, particularly for deafblind communities. And we are developing haptic audiovisual technologies to facilitate safe communication for deafblind communities. The project involves two external partners, Deafblind Scotland as well as Deafblind UK. And the outcomes will be, they're quite diverse actually. We have public engagement activities such as exhibition, as well as workshops, and developing these technology as well, which that's part where Daniela's team and us working together. And we also have policymaking reports and publications as well. So it's kind of like a very, in a way, complex, multifaceted project in that sense. But I should mention that the project has been in the shaping process already for a while. So in 2019, before the, initially we began working with deafblind communities on the issue of perception and sensory perception. In 2019, and we had a number of public engagement activities already within the School of Art and within our school. And those basically seeded these ideas for this bigger project and bigger funding. So initially the idea was to look at sensory perception and investigate audiovisual technologies for that purpose. But once the COVID hit, we realized there are all these other issues involving touch basically, and how coming together of science and art can actually help address an issue which is related to the community outside. But at the same time, we are hoping that their experiences and their views of the world can also inform our own research. And particularly for me, it's exciting because I am a video maker myself, and I use practice-based research in my projects. And working with deafblind community involves lots of learning process for me as well. So I think I'm just gonna pass it on. I think that gives quite a good overview of the project. And I pass it on to Daniele, and he can bring his own perspective and his slides as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Azadeh. So I wanted to, so I'll share screen. And I just want to share with you a few slides. What I want to do is, rather than talk about the project, Azadeh's already gone over the details of that, I wanted to share with you sort of the process that led us to where we are, because one might think that this project just came about pre-formed and ready to go, and that there couldn't be anything further from the truth. So I wanted to sort of explain how it happened and to give you an idea of how long and sort of tortuous but interesting that path was. So it also, I think everything started off Kazi inviting me over to a salon event with you guys. I don't know why she did that, but thank you, it was great. And I was showing some videos. So if my PowerPoint starts, okay, so I was showing this video here of a light pulse propagating. This is a pulse of light propagating through a bottle of Coke. And I was just talking about sort of technology that we're developing. And at the time, so this was first presented in 2012 by Ramesh Raskar, actually. And he was already back then talking about what he called slow art. So using light as a form of artistic expression. But, and I think that's probably what got Azadeh interested. She mentioned that she's a filmmaker. And so we started talking about pixels and what could be done. And I think just the discussion evolved over many cups of coffee. I think we were meeting sort of regularly. We made a point of meeting more or less once a month. And this project then sort of morphed into something completely different. So we started talking about haptics, ultrasonics, the deaf-blind sort of discussion came in. We started playing around. So what you're looking at here is a completely different technology. This is an ultrasound array. So these are like lots of tiny speakers. And you can use these, for example, you can create pressure waves, and you can use these to levitate this little object, which is just floating in free space. But the idea was to use these as sort of a touchless, so contact-free feedback system that deafblind could use. And we had one of the people in my group trying to develop this, and the idea was to see if there's a way to translate video into haptics using these touchless device. There was supposed to be an outreach event, but then COVID happened and that cancelled everything. We continued going anyways, and then we ended up with yet a completely different tech. I mean, I don't know how many engineers are at this meeting, but we completely changed technology again and moved on to these sort of radar sensors that we're currently using. So this is what is in the project that Azadeh was talking about, where we're using this information, we're using from a physics perspective, is really interesting. And we're publishing in top tier journals here. Just because we're working with an artist doesn't mean that we've downgraded the level of our work. And we've got this work has just been accepted in one of the top journals for physicists. And the concept here, and I don't want to go into the details, but it's not too dissimilar. So here's Charlie Chaplin in the Hall of Mirrors. It's not too dissimilar from trying to, if you're in the Hall of Mirrors, you see that if I only have sort of the direct line of sight of a person, I can only see Charlie Chaplin's face and his arm. But now that I have all these mirrors, I can see his side, I can see his back. If I had mirrors on the ceiling, I'd be able to see a view of him from the top or from the bottom. And that's what this information, this is what we're getting from our device, and allows us to then make videos. So this is the kind of video information. We just from very simple data, we can reconstruct a full 3D image of the scene, and then we can feed that back into the haptics. This was one of the previous slides, is now being transformed into wearable device. And this is where everything then is coming together in this project that Azadeh has been talking about. So I wanted to point that out, that it's never, my experience with art is it's never a linear sort of progression, and unexpected things happen. And actually this is now actually becoming one of the more exciting projects in our group, and it was driven by this collaboration. I did also want to mention that I'm not completely new though to sort of collaborating with artists. We had Lily Hibbard as an Australian artist who was an artist in residence for 1 year in 2018, I think. And that was also very interesting. And that was actually my first experience with an artist. And I think I did make the mistake of going into this collaboration, thinking of an artist as an illustrator. And it took me the better part of 6 months to realize, I mean, there was this complete incomprehension divide. She was talking stuff and I just was saying, oh, where are the pictures, where are the drawings? And it slowly dawned on me that that was never going to happen, but it was really interesting. And we finally got there, and we had actually 2 museum exhibitions, one over in Paris, one in Edinburgh. These are just some stills taken from a video. So clearly, I mean, she took on the concept of slow light, again, based on that video, the very first video that I showed you. So our group is sort of, our thing, if you want, is slow light and slowing light down using video, advanced video technology. But she took on this concept and transformed it into something completely different. Clearly, there's no video here. And this is bowl full of goop. I don't know what she put in there, but it was very interesting. The public loved it. There's just a few stills here. This is another something else that we built. There's this sort of vortex fountain. It was all part of the same exhibition. Somehow in her head, it all made sense as part of the same thing. Regardless, it was very visual. The public loved it. It was a fantastic experience for the whole group. And if you want to see a bit more, the videos, I mean, they're on YouTube, but we have, I've got an outreach page on my Glasgow University webpage where you can go there. At least there are 2 videos here. One is specifically shorter video from that exhibition. But this other one here is sort of a bit longer, and it's an interview with Lily and myself talking about why we were doing this, and that might be of interest for others trying to understand what you can gain through these artists, collaborations between scientists and artists. And
thank you, Daniela. I'm just going to dive in there. I'm sorry, I'm just conscious of time. But I wonder, would you be able to put links to those videos in the chat if anyone is interested in following up on that?
I'll do that straight away. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's fantastic, and so interesting to get your sense, almost like a confessional sense of what you learned during this process as well, which is something that I think would be useful to come back to later. But let's go to our final presentation with Ed, Daniel and Annabelle. If you're all over to you, Ed.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. So Daniel and Annabelle have kindly joined in for breakout session, which will follow this. So I'm just going to introduce some of our work in this talk. So I'm going to talk about some projects which for us spun out of involvement in a really innovative master scheme run between the University of Glasgow, led by Paul Ray, and Glasgow School of Art, led there by Daniel Livingstone, who's here with us today. This is the MSc in Medical Visualization and Human Anatomy. And just to show how that's offering some opportunities to think more visually about the sort of work we're doing. So I work at the Centre for Virus Research, and my group works mainly on influenza viruses, which, as you can see, are not the sort of nice crystalline, precisely formed viruses which you typically tended to think of, at least perhaps up until the start of 2020, when you thought virus. These are much more like loose bags, and as well as being extremely small, every one is subtly different from the next. That makes it quite hard to figure out exactly what they're like, and using various methods we can pull together a parts list for what goes in, but this is very quantitative information, and the sort of training which you have, at least I have as a scientist, allows me to rough out schematics which assemble that information without really doing anything terribly helpful with it. So back in 2017, I was fortunate to be introduced to the MSc in Medical Visualization and Human Anatomy, and was able to work with a very talented illustrator, Nina Nair, who took the information we had about what went into influenza virus particles and some overall measurements about their size and the shapes of various proteins, and using her training in illustrating anatomy of humans, was able to translate that into constructing the anatomy of an influenza virus particle. And this really synthesized the information we had and shaped our understanding of what goes into these virus particles in ways which we're now following up on a research front. She also visualized some of the variation you get there at a rather low resolution. And for us, that was really a starting point for a series of projects. So of course, it's a very pretty series of images, and was extremely useful for publicizing a lot of work relating to infectious disease at the University of Glasgow. We've used it in publications, we've used it in public engagement activities. The Glasgow Life Sciences team converted these into searchable images, which can be looked at online and through virtual reality. These were converted by Annabelle Slater, who will feature again in just a moment. And this fed into further projects as well. I'd like to highlight one here carried out by another MSc student, Rachel Sue, who produced an app to explain viruses to teenage audiences through augmented reality. So you can point these devices at posters and look at viral structures in 3 dimensions and explore them. And a beta version of that app is now available on the CVR's website. And it then started to appeal to people beyond the university as well. So recently contacted by Raya Madonna, for example, who's a 3D printer who started producing 3D printed models of these virus structures, which purely from having sort of worked obsessively on them for a number of years was an exciting point to get to. And then obviously at the start of 2020, everything changed, and we all became immediately familiar with this image produced at the CDC of the SARS coronavirus variant. And at this point, Annabelle Slater got back in touch with me. Now, Annabelle is a graduate of the the MSc in medical visualization and human anatomy, although we didn't work together at the time. She was also working for Glasgow Life Sciences for a time and converted the influenza virion model so they could be viewed online. And Annabelle was interested in building a model of the SARS coronavirus particle. So I took a trawl through the scientific literature in my evenings, and Annabelle worked extremely hard to produce what was, for a time, I think, could make a fair claim to be the most detailed model of the SARS coronavirus particle out there, and she's since updated it as well. Of course, it's got a lot of attention, both in the press. A member of my group who's seconded to UKRI used it in UKRI communications to the public about how the virus was structured. Ryan became involved in printing it. We produced public engagement resources. It's recently been used to illustrate, in fact, just this week, a major reagent sharing resource, which has been put out as well. So these things have found a very wide number of homes. So I'm going to keep this fairly short because I'm conscious of the time, and I'm also, I really just wanted to highlight a number of ways in which this could take place. I'm hoping this video will play. It may not, which would be a terrible shame because this is, oh, here we are. So this is Annabelle's illustrated model of a virus particle. Whilst finishing with that, I wanted to just highlight a few things. So firstly is this MSc. So the call for projects this year for the Glasgow School of Arts, University of Glasgow MSc has just gone out. It's been promoted to everyone in MVLS should have received an email about it, but if you have projects which are in field, then Paul Ray is very happy to put those over as well. And Daniel from GSA is going to be here to discuss that in the breakout sessions if any of you are interested in that. So I'd like to really recommend that scheme to you as an opportunity to get involved with some really exciting and well-trained scientific illustrators. I'd also really like to thank a number of people involved, particularly Annabelle, who's produced these really remarkable images, which have been extremely useful in talking to people and communicating about the research done on SARS coronaviruses, to Daniel, who's supported so many of these projects, and to a number of other colleagues who've been involved in these as well. So I'll wrap up that one there and just leave you with Nina's virion floating in space. Sorry, Annabelle's virion floating in space at the end of that. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ed. That's really good, really fascinating projects. I wish we had more time to, well, I suppose we do have a little bit more time to dive into them before the end of this session. I'm wondering, please do, if anyone has any questions to any of the speakers, please do pop them, and if we don't have time to get to them today, we'll try and find a way to link you up. But I wonder if I could be so bold as to dive in with a question for each of the speakers, specifically to do with the public engagement element of this. I'm interested in a sense to know what did public engagement bring to the collaboration that wouldn't have been there otherwise? Because I suppose there are three elements really that we're interweaving here: the arts and science and the public. And I wonder if we go sort of round the other way. Ed, is there anything in particular that you'd want to respond about?
So I think, so I've already spoken about the way that it's influenced our thinking about the structure of the virus particle itself. Some of these resources were created with some of the CVR's ongoing public engagement in mind, and they've aligned well with that. But also there's been part of the reason I spoke about this in the way I did was just to emphasize the sort of slightly snowballing nature of these projects in a positive way. And one thing certainly with these projects is each time we've publicly discussed what we've done, that's led on to further collaborations, further ways to take them forwards. So Annabelle's involvement, Ryan's involvement in developing these projects and suggesting new ways to develop them has come sequentially through a series of public engagement projects. So. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. And I wonder, in a sense, does that link Daniele and Azadeh to what you were saying about how this is something that emerges during the process?
Yes, I mean, in terms of, do you mean in terms of public engagement or in terms of ideas?
Well, I suppose both, but initially with the public engagement side.
For us, the way that it works is that we started with an idea. Well, I had an idea. I was doing already some research on perception. But then again, once the community and public comes to it, once you start to present your ideas to a wider public, then there's a possibility of these external collaborations. And yeah, it's similar. It's kind of like a snowballing process. So you start with something, and then that starts to develop and improve as time goes by, and then you expand on that.
Does that make it a different process to other research collaborations that you have? Yes,
I just wanted to quickly add, I mean, it's very different, and it's not better or worse. It's just different, and I think it has its own value, and it has, you know, first with Lily. And now with Azadeh, I mean, also with Lily, I didn't mention this, but from our previous collaborations, so every time we've collaborated properly with an artist, so not as an illustrator. So all my scientific illustrations, I just pay someone and get them done now. I've got the concept. When we do proper collaborations with artists, it actually ends up driving and creating sometimes even a new sort of research line within the group that wasn't there before. So there's more to it, I think, than just the outreach aspect. It really does help shape the science that we do. And I think that is, for me, that was the big discovery, and that's the main take-home point.
Can I just say something? Yeah, sorry, Danielle. You want
No, go.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say, perhaps for me, the experience is slightly different because I am used to interdisciplinary research and practice-based research. And I think one thing to note is that once when you're doing interdisciplinary and practice-based research, you constantly have to adjust and adapt, and also read or try to understand all these different fields that you're working and collaborating with. And I think for me, working with Daniela, it's been quite refreshing, but even from an artist point of view, there is always this element of, okay, well, how do they perceive our field, or how are they understanding our points, or what could also help them in their research? So constantly moving between what I do and what I understand and what they do and they understand is quite, and it can be challenging. There are times where I'm like, okay, am I doing it right or not? But I think that's the nature of interdisciplinary research, that is based on practice as research as well.
But if I may add to that, sort of the scientist perspective, what you just said, Azadeh, I mean, I don't want to talk for all STEM scientists here, but I think for a majority of us, when we use the words interdisciplinary, we're thinking of, for example, a collaboration between myself and Ed, for example. It's going to be between me and MVLS, or a biologist maybe, and even that for a lot of engineers or physicists would be a bit of a stretch, and there's already divides and everything. But we would do that, and we try to do that because we would think that there would be something new in our research, and there would be something interesting that we could do together, and we'd get good papers and so on. I think most STEM researchers would struggle to use the words interdisciplinary when talking about working with an artist. Or sorry, rather, they would probably use interdisciplinary, but I'm not sure they would call it research. As in, I think most of us would go into something like this, either looking at it as a pastime or something that's not going to be directly beneficial to the actual science you're doing. It might be great to the outreach, and that's how most of us will perceive this. I think what most of us are missing is the fact that there's a very not obvious, but there is an opportunity to actually make the science you're doing better, different, more diverse, and that was the eye-opener for me.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Daniela. And it'd be interesting in the breakout sessions to return to this, another visualizing the question around visualizing as one of our breakout sessions. Sarah, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation?
I mean, I suppose on the question of publics, as a curator and also a practice-based researcher who uses exhibitions as a way to change the conversation around art and science, my initial public was scientists, right? So I wanted them to understand that art is more than just illustration, which I'm really excited to know that Daniele's got that now in an amazing way. And I thought by showing a lot of different kinds of art, different ways in which artists work, different practices that artists use, different tools that artists use, that then there would be something that a scientist might pick up on. So that was like the first level of public engagement from that point of view, is let's get everyone on the same level here about what's happening. This is an experimental research driven process in whatever field. And then the second was, particularly with Daksha and Miratul, how they were working with their patient groups. So some, you know, as people who have both clinical practices as well as research practices within a university, but some of the scientists within Miratul's lab don't encounter the patients and don't know how to, or not sure, you know, what sort of conversations to have. So to have an artist as a really productive in-between person takes some of the pressure off the scientists for them to feel like they have to be the ones who do the public engagement themselves, to actually take the skills of an artist who knows how to run a drawing workshop and knows how to elicit conversations about what these images mean to people, and willing to experiment with different processes and practices of drawing. And that has then, I understand, resulted in other research lines for Miratul and his team to think about other therapies and other ways of working. But I think we'd need to just be mindful of like who are the publics that we're talking about. It's not a generic public, right?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I suppose that's one of the, certainly from our perspective as the engagement forum, is that the benefit of building in the awareness of your public, the awareness of your audience at the beginning is mutually beneficial to the researchers as well as to the publics that you're engaging with. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and I'm wondering, unless there are any pressing questions right now, we might break into our breakout session. There's a bit more space there, sort of 15-20 minutes or so to further these conversations. So I think what I'll do, there's some instruction from Zara in the chat there. I wonder if, Zara, can you explain to us what's happening next?